Good afternoon. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to tonight's guest, a special welcome to tonight's guest. We could not have timed tonight's program on the subject of abortion rights any better. There is likely no topic of greater priority to the vast majority of not only America's women, but hopefully most of America's men than the one we are covering tonight. We are fortunate to welcome the dynamic Cecile Richards, former longtime president of Planned Parenthood and amongst the most knowledgeable Americans on the subject of abortion rights. Welcome, Cecile. And we also welcome our amazing moderator, Patt Morrison. Thank you both for being here. America at a Crossroads is a joint venture between Jews United for Democracy and Justice and Community Advocates, Inc. Thanks as always to our leadership team, which in addition to me includes David Lehrer, former Congressman Mel Levine, Zev Yaroslavsky, Rabbi Ken Chazen, and Caroline Kelly. Next week, we welcome one of America's greatest constitutional scholars, Lawrence Tribe of Harvard Law School. He will be in conversation with media law expert Henry Weinstein of UC Irvine School of Law in a discussion about threats to our Constitution and our democracy. And then on October 28th, we will host historian and cultural critic Ruth Ben-Ghiat, a highly decorated scholar on the subjects of fascism, propaganda, and authoritarianism. Professor Ben-Ghiat will be joined by frequent guest and political sociologist at Stanford, Larry Diamond, to discuss strong men, how they rise, how they succeed, and how they fall. Please note that on October 5th, in deference and in observance of Yom Kippur, we will have no program that night. I know I sound like a broken record, but be sure not to unsubscribe or you will not get the emails with our registration links and our Zoom links. Many of you have asked about closed captioning. We have closed captioning on from our end. If you're using a mobile device, our automatic closed captions are always on. However, if you view our program using a desktop computer or a laptop, you may need to turn closed captioning on from your end. To do this, move your mouse to bring up the menu at the bottom of the Zoom screen, click on the button marked CC, which stands for closed captioning, and then click Show Subtitles at the top of the menu that appears. And maybe we'll put that in the chat tonight, just so those of you who need a repeat of those instructions can get it. But I hope that helps because some people have a hard time. We have no control over people's sounds and microphones. So if you think you're having a hard time hearing some of our speakers or moderators, we suggest that you turn on your closed captioning. Thank you for all of your donations, large and small. They enable these programs. And thank you, as always, for being with us tonight. Now, my dear friend and colleague, David Lehrer, is going to have a couple more announcements for us. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Janice. Tonight's program, as Janice mentioned, is timely not only in terms of our current national discussion on reproductive rights, but is also relevant because it is at the intersection of policy, politics, and public opinion in an almost unprecedented way. The media is not quite sure what to make of the public's reaction to the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision. Who will be motivated to vote? Is the electorate different than in 2020 or 2018? And what will that mean 4.5 months after the ruling shook the nation? Will the passion still be there? Tonight, I think we'll learn a lot. In addition to the programs that Janice just outlined, we have secured an impressive lineup of speakers for the next several months. As you can see on your screen, we feature superstars. From one of the nation's leading legal commentators, Dahlia Lithwick of Slate and Newsweek, who will discuss her soon-to-be published book, Lady Justice, Women, the Law, and the Battle to Save America, to the New York Times chief White House correspondent, Peter Baker and Susan Glasser, the New Yorker's White House maven. They'll be revealing fascinating facts and analyses from their book, The Divider, Trump in the White House 2017-2021, which is also coming out next week. There were some snippets of it in today's news that sounded absolutely intriguing. Other discussions will feature former LA Police Chief and former New York Police Commissioner William Bratton, together with the present Chief of LA Police, Michael Moore. Former ambassador to Moscow, Mike McFaul, will talk about the Ukraine-Russia war. Washington Post columnist Max Boot will talk about a whole variety of issues. And later in November, the Council on Foreign Relations Chair Richard Haass and former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security Juliette Kayyem, author of The Devil Never Sleeps, Learning to Live in an Age of Disasters, will make appearances. We are excited to host them all. Tonight's guest is an activist leader who's made a difference in her home state of Texas and across the country, Cecile Richards. She served as the national president and voice of Planned Parenthood for a dozen years She also founded the Texas Freedom Network to counter the activities of the religious right regarding prayer in the schools, abstinence-only sex education, and the teaching of creationism. She has and continues to make a significant difference. Our moderator, Patt Morrison, returns tonight after last week's discussion. She's a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist at Times, who has won multiple Emmys for her work in TV, Golden Mics for her work on public radio, and has authored 2 best-selling books. It's a pleasure to welcome her back. Pat?
Thank you, David, and thank you to everybody who sponsors and puts together these remarkable programs. And thank you so much, Ms. Richards. I think it couldn't be more timely to have you here with us tonight. Thank you again. Can we hear you?
Yeah, just unmuting myself. Thank you,
right.
Pat, and thank you everyone for this invitation. It's awesome to be with you, and I love that everyone's from all over the country. This is what we need more of. So it's just a joy to be here.
It's often said that this or that event resets the political game board, and I don't think that that is an overstatement when it comes to the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision earlier this year, ended a 50-year precedent overturning Roe versus Wade, in the wake of which many states scrambled, in fact, to be first to see which one could ban or restrict abortion in that particular state. But now we've seen some blowback, a vote in Kansas that said no to changing the Constitution in order to keep abortion rights in that state. And a lot of backpedaling and scrambling from Republican candidates and surges by Democratic candidates, in part because of this particular issue. So I suppose the first question for you should be, maybe the lesson for Republicans is be careful what you wish for, it might come true.
I actually think, Pat, that's sort of the way I have seen this. And I'll just take Texas as an example, where actually they really banned abortion more than a year ago with SB 8, which was the bounty hunter system that was put in place and was actually was in effect even before Dobbs was the ruling. And it was interesting because, of course, in Texas, Republican politicians love to champion, ending abortion, champion the unborn, have a lot of rhetoric that they were free to use all the time because we had a constitutional right and they never really had to deal with the consequences. Texas, and I think the Republican Party now broadly, is definitely the dog who caught the bus. We are now seeing, certainly in that state, we can talk about Texas, but we're seeing across the country, the public have to see what happens when you ban safe and legal abortion. We all knew, and we said this for years, is that banning abortion doesn't make it go away. It simply makes it become unsafe, and people are harmed. But I do think the Republicans, I'm sure that's part of what this conversation is about tonight. It has just been fascinating to see the division in the party. Certainly yesterday we saw Lindsey Graham decide he wanted to pass a national abortion ban, bringing this issue right back up again and making it squarely in the middle of United States Senate races, which are hotly contested right now. That is extremely unpopular. And I feel like we're seeing, Blake Masters in Arizona trying to scrub his campaign website for all of his extreme statements on abortion. So I think the Republicans are in disarray on this issue. I think they are shocked, frankly, to see the kind of outpouring of anger and frustration from not just the political classes, everyday voters.
Blake Masters, who's the Senate nominee, the Republican in Arizona, did remove language from his website that said, I am 100% pro-life. We have House candidates Tom Barrett of Michigan, Christian Costelli in North Carolina, Barbara Kirkmeyer in Colorado, taking language like that from their websites. Minnesota's nominee for governor, Scott Jensen, changed the copy on his website to water down his abortion message, removing lines including, he believes in the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death. This has been an automatic kind of position, as you say, for the Republicans, certainly since Ronald Reagan had an anti-abortion plank put in the Republican Party platform when he ran for president of the United States. How hard is it to unring these bells when it comes to voters?
Well, it's interesting. I work with a group, American Bridge, that thankfully, got on top of this way back, before the Dobbs decision and launched a website called Reprofiles, where all of their statements are there in living color. And so I think, and of course, we are seeing now in these hotly contested races across the country, candidates, Democratic candidates, running paid advertising on the extreme positions of their opponents. I think it's very difficult for folks to sort of roll this back, because of course, then they fear what they've always feared, which is the backlash of the extreme right wing of their party. So I don't think it's going to be possible. And they've got themselves in a jam. So we'll see. I have not, I mean, I guess the thing I have been so stunned about in terms of this crop of candidates, Republican candidates for United States Senate, for governor across the country, is they're pretty much to a person very extreme on this issue, and it's just unpopular. So I don't think I don't think there's much room for them to move.
The leak of this decision, a draft of this decision, was issued more than a month before the actual decision. Do you think that had any impact on how this is playing out now?
Well, I guess in some ways it gave everybody a little bit of a taste of what was coming, and I think it did kind of prepare people. But I do know, we did research on this. People really never believed that the Supreme Court would overturn Roe. And, I've been working this issue for a long, long time. And in fact, reporters now say to me, well, this wasn't an issue, a voting issue before, although I take issue with that because I think it was for many people. But for some people, it wasn't, because it was a constitutional right. We have never experienced having a constitutional right completely taken away from folks in this country. And so I think there was really no way to predict. But in a way, it kind of, because it was a prequel, it kind of told people this is coming. And then when it came, again, we began to see not only, we can talk about Kansas, but we began to see women registering to vote in record numbers in swing states around the country. Sort of folks begin to realize, okay, this is not a dress rehearsal. This is real. And I think one of the things that's most important to me, people used to just say, well, that's Texas or that's Mississippi. I don't live there. Now they're realizing it could come to a theater near you. And I think in these gubernatorial races, it's really fascinating because, of course, they're looking in, whether it's Michigan, Pennsylvania, and go down the list, they're looking around and saying, like, well, it's happening in the state next to ours. And if the only difference that, the thing that really makes a difference is, do you have a Republican governor or not? I think it's going to be a voting issue in what were going to be very, very close gubernatorial races. They still may be, but it is definitely animating our voters.
It seems that for a lot of people, even pro-choice people, it was abstract. And then once the Dobbs decision came down, you began hearing the horror stories. The 10-year-old girl in Ohio who was raped, who was not allowed to get an abortion and had to leave the state. This is a story that Republican political leaders doubted was actually true. There's a woman now in Louisiana who's bearing a fetus with no skull, having to go to New York to get an abortion. So these concrete examples that started almost immediately in the wake of the Dobbs decision and states banning abortion are resonating perhaps more than just saying abortion is now illegal. Are you finding that that's the case with voters? And is this something that Democratic candidates are making a point of as well?
So it's interesting because on the one hand, you're right. There are these extreme circumstances and stories that have broken through to some extent. We had in Texas, of course, 26-year-old young woman in South Texas who was put in jail, turned in by the hospital to the sheriff's office for having allegedly tried to terminate a pregnancy. These are stories that people are hearing, but I actually think it's a little bit different than that, in that it is becoming real for everybody, because not everyone can imagine themselves in an extreme circumstance, but pretty much everybody in this country has dealt in some way or form with a troubled pregnancy, an unintended pregnancy, a family member. You have it. And that's where I think the interesting thing is, this is not a niche issue. This is everybody as my mom would say, this is an I Hear America singing issue. This is something that is absolutely breaking through. And there was just a poll, my concern, frankly, when this was all coming up was like, well, people are not going to know what's going on, right? We're gonna have to spend a ton of time explaining to people what's happening. There was just a recent national poll of voters that basically demonstrated that about 85% of voters in this country know that Roe was overturned and that abortion is becoming illegal. And most of them are pretty accurate about what has happened in their own state. So this is not a matter where people are like, oh, I heard about that somewhere. People actually are focused on it. And that is interesting. I would not have predicted that, but it is very quickly, I think partly because every week, today West Virginia, every day, every week, there is another story either of an individual or of a state that has banned abortion. And it's becoming real for all folks.
That is a very high number of
Huge
percentage of awareness about a particular issue. But now, does it translate at the polls? Because as you know, over years and years, Republicans in particular have had gun issues, abortion issues, and gay rights issues as primary drivers of people to the polls. Now the question is abortion going to be doing the same thing for Democrats?
So I just got the Kansas analysis, which some folks may have already read today, but it was really interesting that Tom Bonnier put out from Target Smart. These are just some, again, Kansas isn't, we can't draw all the conclusions from Kansas, but I think it's the best example of what is happened in a statewide election. Of course, that was a ballot. That was an election date that was chosen to try to minimize turnout. There was very little on the ballot. It was a primary. It was the beginning of August, like not an optimal time for voting. And yet we saw record turnout in the election. 20% of those voters didn't vote on anything except the ballot initiative. That was the only thing they voted for. And so these are the number, I'm just looking at them because I want to make sure I get them right. Of the voters who turned out in the Kansas ballot referendum, 56% of them were women. So a huge, huge gender gap. Even though we won that by almost 20 points, 51% of the voters in that ballot initiative, in that primary election, were Republicans. So you can do the math. That means a lot of Republicans voted against this ballot measure. And then I think the most interesting, because it's just sort of a group that I'm obsessed with, is that young voters. So in 2018, 14% of young voters turned out. We know that young voters are a hard to turn out group. But in 2022, in this ballot initiative, 21% of young voters turned out in a very low education, election where this was really the only thing. That's like another third over what turnout usually was among that group. So I think the thing that is, and again, that was like straight up and down about abortion. It wasn't a gubernatorial race. It wasn't a Senate race. And I will say it's very consistent with when I was at Planned Parenthood, we had similar ballot initiatives in conservative states, in South Dakota, in Mississippi. The voters handily voted down abortion bans in those conservative states as well. So I think Kansas actually is fairly consistent. But I think, to me, what I'm taking out of what we're seeing in terms of increased voter registration among women, what we saw in Kansas, what we saw in the New York special, and then what we can talk about what the candidates are saying is, for Democrats, this does two things. It helps us with a motivation issue, an enthusiasm issue. People are fired up about this issue. And then it also helps us with swing and independent voters, particularly women, but not only women. This is an issue that cuts through party lines. And as we know, in some of these states, we can't win with just Democrats alone.
So is there a range of approaches by Democratic candidates on how to weave this into their campaigns? Is there some unifying principle that an email blast to Democratic candidates saying this is the way to approach this matter when you campaign?
I don't know that there has been an email blast and as Democrats are always fiercely independent, everyone likes to do their own thing. But I will say that the overarching message, and we certainly saw this in the ads in Kansas that were run, which are really worth looking at for anyone who sort of likes to nerd out on stuff like this. I mean, the overarching issue is one of freedom. It is about freedom to make the decisions you want to make about your own family, about your own pregnancy, without government interference. And so I would say that is a consistent theme. I mean, for my,
not even using the word abortion, it's possible to integrate.
I'm kind of I think that I know some people are saying that, but people know what this is about. I think sometimes we're like too cute by half. I think that the thing that is, I always felt like this, again, from working at Planned Parenthood, from talking to people, patients, people simply do not believe that abortion is a political issue. They believe it is a deeply personal issue. People have their own feelings. Sometimes they have very strong feelings about abortion. And a lot of people have experience. 1 in 4 women in this country have had an abortion. So this is not a theoretical topic. They simply do not believe that government should make those decisions. And I think the most important thing is, this is not about judging, who did what, who made what decision. This is about saying the government has no business telling you when and whether to have a kid. And the other thing I would add to that is that now that we are seeing, efforts by states to restrict travel for women who may want to go to a state and have a safe and legal abortion in a state where it's not prohibited, the stories that are coming out about surveillance, about prosecutors using search history online. I will tell you, this was part of this other this national poll that is really, really upsetting to people. So I think and to me, all of this falls under freedom. It's like, do we live in a country where we respect people's freedom and individual decisions? And obviously this is an organization, I'm talking to folks here who understand the importance of the church-state separation. I think we can just sort of broaden it to say, this is where people draw the line and say, we do not need the government making these decisions for us. And we will vote against people who take that position.
So, for example, the constitutional right to freedom of movement within the United States, or the question of who has access to your period apps, those become the heart of this, whether or not you have any concerns about abortion in particular as a political issue.
Well, I mean, I don't want to say that in that I do think abortion is the one that is right in front of people, but I think everything the Republicans are doing, I mean, as you said, is from the beginning of this conversation, when it was sort of a theoretical concept, like, what do you think about this constitutional right? It's like, I mean, people could say a lot of things. Now, though, people are having to deal with, this is what it looks like. I mean, this is actually what it means. This is what it means for a young person not to be able to turn to anybody in her state, which is what's happening in Texas. This is what it means to have, a high-risk maternal OBGYN in Dallas tell me, I can't even counsel my patients anymore. I have to literally not say anything because I could be aiding and abetting. I can't even give them the best advice. This is like a woman last week in Dallas telling me, worried about her daughter who had an ectopic pregnancy. And what if that happens again? A woman is desperately hoping to have a grandchild. These are not theoretical issues for people. These are real life issues for people. And the Republican Party is talking about this as if it's a political matter, and it simply isn't. They are tone deaf about where the American people are.
We're seeing this, and we'll be getting to some questions from the viewers as well, but we're seeing this as we hear about some of these cases, like the ectopic pregnancy, when you had a religious conservative group saying, pregnancy never endangers the life of the mother. And you have quandaries by doctors, as you point out, because legislators are not medical experts. They have not defined what these terms are. And when there are criminal penalties, a lot of doctors are simply opting to say, I don't want to do anything about this. And if my judgment about the life of the mother is second guessed by politicians, by prosecutors, I may wind up in prison. And these stories are beginning to accumulate too. Do these stories end up working their way into the political discourse and the way people make their decisions?
I believe they do, Pat, but again, because not because they're extreme and wild, it's because they're actually very believable and they are everybody's lived experience. I was talking to one of the doctors in El Paso at Planned Parenthood who reported a woman coming to her, a woman who was miscarrying, who was turned away at the hospital because they didn't know like what, they didn't want to get in trouble. And here's a woman like having nowhere to go. These are the kinds of real lived experiences for people that are penetrating into the American public. And it's interesting. I'm doing a lot of work for Beto O'Rourke. So if any of my Texas friends are on, like, yay, go Beto. He's been doing town hall meetings all over the state of Texas, and the numbers of women who are just voluntarily in town hall meetings in front of, hundreds of strangers just telling their own stories is incredible. These stories are not unique. In fact, they are really common.
Well, in fact, a couple of our listeners, Joan and Larry, how big a role will this play in the Texas governor's race? Will it be dispositive, maybe?
Well, this is the closest we've come in a long, long time. I guess since my mom won the governorship many, many, many moons ago. This is the closest we've come. And it's interesting in Beto's campaign, it's a very strategic campaign. I mean, they're looking at, there's a lot of issues in Texas, the energy grid, just you can go down the list, pay for public school teachers. The first 3 ads, paid advertising that the Beto O'Rourke campaign ran were on the topic of abortion. It's so extreme in Texas. People they're fearful, they're distraught. And so I think, they wouldn't be running those ads if they didn't believe that they were salient and breaking through with voters that they need to get. And that includes a lot of independent and Republican voters. But it's not just Beto. I mean, look at, again, the Pennsylvania governor's race, Josh Shapiro running ads on the extremism of his opponent. This is happening all across the country. Democrats are on the offense on this issue, and it's very consistent.
Under the heading of coulda, woulda, shoulda, there's a lot of discussion now, as there has been off and on over the years, why Congress, when it's been in the hands of Democrats with a Democratic White House, why Congress did not act to codify and put Roe into law when it had the opportunity. Because even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as a lawyer and as a justice, talked about the shifting sands upon which Roe was built as a legal decision and how much easier it would be to overturn it. Why didn't Congress do something about this when the opportunity presented itself?
Well, I don't know, and I can't really speak to that, but I mean, yes, I wish that had happened. And that's actually what's going to happen. We are not going to litigate our way out of this situation. This is a problem that was caused by politics. It's going to be solved by politics. That's just my, and in the meantime, we have to do a lot of work to take care of people who desperately need our support and our care. We need to get women to places where they can access safe and legal abortion, et cetera. But this is something where if we can't, well, I'm not saying, I'm going to flip that. We can and must mobilize the 8 in 10 Americans who believe that abortion should be legal in this country. And I agree in general that we've rested too long on a constitutional right. I think we always knew it was at risk. I will also say, one presidential election, a handful of votes, honestly, in light of the enormity of the American voting population, Hillary Clinton would have had potentially three Supreme Court nominees, right? Things could have been different, but that doesn't matter. Here we are. This is it. We are now literally everything's flipped on its head. We are no longer defending a constitutional right. We are fighting to regain one. And that means it is going to take state by state organizing, politics, and mobilizing the overwhelming majority of people in this country who need to be engaged and need to be voting.
We have been seeing a lot of the replay of clips of Donald Trump's 3 nominees for the Supreme Court talking about Roe when asked about it. And they would say things like, Roe is settled precedent. Roe is the law of the land, all of which is true, but they never went any farther and said, I will uphold it. I won't uphold it. I feel perfectly free to change precedent if that's what it takes.
I mean, right, Donald Trump said, and there's a lot of things Donald Trump said, and we were like, oh, he's just blah, blah, blah. Donald Trump said he was going to only put people on the Supreme Court that would vote to overturn Roe. And that's what he did. So you can, and I know you're having Dahlia Lithwick, or I think you are later. Are you having her? Is she coming on? Yes. Oh my God. You should ask her about this issue. She's so brilliant. This is her, this is her entire thing. We're often on panels together and I constantly like defer to her, but you're right. I mean, I think they artfully lied to the United States Senate, and it doesn't surprise me at all. And I think the other problem, of course, and I know that you all work on so many more issues than this, we're just the first step in the barrel. This Supreme Court, all the things that I think we have all fought for all of our lives, voting rights, civil rights, LGBTQ rights, right to marry, right to contraception, even, for God's sake, everything's at risk with this court. And this has to go back to mobilizing people, to agitate, to hold people accountable. And until Republicans start losing elections over what they have done, they're going to just continue to act with impunity.
And that's one of the questions that readers like, or the viewers like Eric have asked about the right to privacy, this fundamental, maybe shaky now platform, whether something is fundamental in itself as contraception might be at risk in the hands of this court.
I mean, I just can't put anything past them, because obviously the whole, yes, the whole basis upon which these rights were established has been thrown out. And we just saw in the Republican, when this issue came before the U.S. House of Representatives, it was only a handful of Republicans who were even willing to vote to say, yes, there is an established right to contraception in this country. This is not, everyone's always saying that we're, hysterical and making this, but when you can't even vote as a member of Congress to say that birth control should be legal for people in America, it's absolutely at risk. How incredible is that?
There has been some pushback from an unexpected, perhaps, quarter religious organizations who say, wait a minute, abortion is part of our religious rights. There was in Florida an argument of a case that was filed arguing that banning abortion is a violation of Jews' First Amendment right to practice their religion. Well, these arguments go very far because we see a strong belief in the First Amendment, but an asterisk, maybe some exceptions apply when it comes to this court.
I mean, I just hate to say it. And again, Dahlia's, she's much more versed in constitutional law. I just think the problem we have is that, and I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but I should, the number of federal judges that Donald Trump put onto the bench, and of course, obviously the Supreme Court, I think everything is sort of up for grabs. I don't think there is anything. I've actually been talking to, law professors who are saying it's hard now to even teach students sort of what is settled law, because I think we're in a whole new world right now. And I mean, it's just, we just, potentially lost a case on the ACA in Texas, a judge. I mean, anyway, I don't even go through, you all have examples. This is a judiciary that we cannot look to protect any established rights, I believe. And that is going to it's going to require us to fight these out in the political arena.
One of our viewers, Doris, wants to know how men poll on the issue of abortion rights. Is there much of a difference?
That's an interesting question, Doris. So men actually are as supportive of the right to access abortion as women. Historically, and this was just from my years at Planned Parenthood, even though they were as supportive, they didn't vote on this issue as much as women did. Maybe that's not such a big surprise. And so I think this is going to be an interesting test in this election, how much this is a motivating issue for men, and how much they were willing to break either with the party or if they're independent voters. so one measure is, of course, where the side of energy is right now. And I gave you the numbers in Kansas, but I know also I had looked at these earlier in Ohio, where there is a big Senate race. I think as everyone knows, it's a state too that has banned abortion. Of course, J.D. Vance has got a very extreme position on abortion. Whether or not how that race is going to go, I can't say. But since the Dobbs decision, women have outregistered men by an 11-point margin. So in terms of, even if men have the same, sort of point of view, I don't know that they have the same enthusiasm. I also, in Pennsylvania, again, a state that I know a lot of people are really watching, among new registrants, women are 56% of that. And the other interesting thing about Pennsylvania is, among newly registered female voters, which is very significant in the state, 62% of them are Democratic versus 15% Republican. So there is a surge in women's interest and enthusiasm. And again, we talked about the numbers in Kansas, but I think actually I'll be interested. The other group I think we really need to look at is young men. I think this is an issue that is motivating for young men, but again, it's going to take a lot of work, and it's not easy always for young people to vote. So I think that all of us collectively have a lot to do to make sure that they have the opportunity and frankly, the information to vote this fall.
Let's take a moment to answer a couple of questions of the same. Could you repeat the name of the website, Reprofile, I think that you mentioned?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Reprofiles.com. And reprofiles.plural.com.
I
know if I was smart enough, I could actually type it into the chat. And if I can figure that out.
We can do it if you'll spell it. We'll put it in there.
Okay. It's I'm just not that good. I can't do all the things at the same time because I'm not a millennial.
We have a www, yes.
It's HTTP, /repro-files.com/.
Okay.
And I use it. I mean, it's great. I think it's super thorough, and there's nothing glamorous about it, but it has all the facts that you need on the competitive races.
Okay. One of the things that helped propel support for gay marriage and gay rights is the fact that people came to a realization that in almost every family, someone who's gay, a family member or a friend. Is that going to be influential here? Because everyone may have a sister or a daughter or a niece and may begin to think about it differently through their eyes.
It's such a good point. And of course, a lot of us who've been working in this field have been trying to learn from the incredible success of the marriage campaign and the equality campaign. I do think that one of the problems is that no one talks about abortion. And I think it's important when 1 in 4 women in this country have had an abortion. Everyone knows someone who's had an abortion. I had an abortion. I talk about it publicly. In fact, I'm glad you asked the question because otherwise I might have forgotten to say that. So now everybody on this call knows someone who's had an abortion. I have. And I think that the stigma and shame for women in general, but certainly on reproductive issues, and the issues of abortion are deep-seated and long-standing. And what I think is interesting now, because it kind of goes to the question you were actually asking earlier about, well, should we just sort of more talk about it, freedom, and not talking about abortion? I think it's actually really important that we do talk about it. And actually, it's interesting that people are saying the word abortion. They're talking about it on national television. People are having conversations about it. I think that's incredibly healthy, and it will help because it has been sort of an unspoken secret. People I have known my entire life are now telling me that they had an abortion. And I was the abortion lady. There was no shame, right, in telling me that. But I just think it's so important. It's important for parents to talk to their kids. I was just on actually with a Reverend Cantor in Dallas. He's the head of the Unitarian Church in Dallas, my old church when I grew up there. And he's now started telling his own story about going to college and being, being part of an unintended pregnancy and helping his girlfriend at the time get an abortion. He'd never really told that story before. So I think it's important that men, that everybody talk about how abortion and safe and legal abortion has been an important part of their own lives and their own ability to make important decisions. So we can't do more unless we destigmatize this issue, and having open conversation about it is one important way.
At the top, we mentioned Lindsey Graham's proposal to limit abortion to 15 weeks, which of course would not affect states that have already banned it, but it would affect states like California, where it's still legal and where the time period is much more expansive. And some of his colleagues were rather horrified, feeling they were being put on the spot by this at a time when Republicans may be a little uneasy about having to answer to the consequences of the Dobbs decision. So our viewer Dina asks, what's animated the Republican states who've adopted these virtual bans? Does polling support their actions? It seems like it's not smart politics. Is there something that tells them that it is smart politics to go back to the pre-Roe days?
That's a great point, Dina. And yeah, I will say I've taken 24 hours of joy at Lindsey Graham's like uncomfortableness. But no, actually talking again about like Kansas, South Dakota, Mississippi, places where we showed on the ballot, people did not want abortion bans, but with the structure of the Republican Party and the ascendancy of the extreme right in the party, people were terrified of being targeted and by the right to life, you name it, whatever, pick your local flavor of the groups. And they kept moving further and further to the right. In fact, I'll never forget a conversation I had with a Republican member of Congress, a woman. I knew she was pro-choice because we had 3 Planned Parenthoods in her district. And when they first started talking about banning Planned Parenthood, back in 2010, and I went to visit with her and she said, Cecile, I know the important work that you all do, but if I vote, if I don't vote to defund Planned Parenthood, they're going to come after me in my primary. And I want to go back to her now and say, well, how'd that work out for you? Now your entire Republican Party has been taken over by these people that are so extreme, but that essentially is what's happened. I will say in the state of Texas, it is not popular. I mean, and again, I think that's why Beto is running ads on this, not only because he's a very strong supporter of access to abortion, access to Planned Parenthood, access to family planning, maternal health benefits, but he's running ads because this is the most unpopular thing that Greg Abbott has done. I don't even know if you saw Greg Abbott
saying something.
What's that?
That's saying something.
That is saying something because this is a really competitive race. He could be running ads on anything. That is really saying this is an issue where people are breaking with the Republican Party. Of course, Greg Abbott also, there's an ad up now, I think. Greg Abbott also, when asked about the fact that there was no exception for survivors of rape and incest, he said his solution was we were just going to round up all the rapists in Texas. I won't even dignify that with like all the things we could say about that. But this is the interesting thing. And again, it kind of goes back to your original point. The Republicans are on hard turf here. This is not popular what they are doing. It is not defensible. The inhumanity of what's happening to women, to families, to communities is on full display. And there really is no place for them to go. And that's frankly why I am glad to see that Democrats are going on offense and quit playing defense on this issue.
There was a story just a day or so ago about Mike Pence, who has been campaigning against abortion for a long time, and how he made a speech that pointed out with a glass of champagne in his hand, saying that abortion bans are more important than short-term politics. In other words, that Republicans should fall on their swords and defend the Dobbs decision, defend what states are doing in banning abortion.
Well, that is absolutely Mike Pence, 100,000%. He was, of course, behind all the efforts to defund Planned Parenthood and family planning services for millions of American women. And look, I think that is where, he's kind of drawn the line here. And that's where those of us who care about this issue, it is incumbent on us to show them that this is an issue that will lose them votes, it will lose them seats, it will lose them elections. But I mean, again, I'm just too practical about this. Until we can do that, the Republicans will continue to go this way because they are really in this box, right? They have to keep doing right-wing things because that's who they rely on to win these elections. It's why in Texas we saw them, it wasn't like they just ended with abortion bans. Then they went after transgender kids and their families. This is like, they are going to continue to do this until they feel like they're going to pay a political price. And but yes, that's where Mike Pence is. And that's where the Republican Party is. That's why all the candidates you're seeing, almost, I can't even name a single one in a high profile race in this country right now of Republicans, Senate, gubernatorial races, statewide races, that is not extreme on this issue of abortion.
Mina wants to know whether Planned Parenthood is in danger of having its offices closed. We know that Planned Parenthood has operated under a number of restrictions for years, security concerns among them, and that Planned Parenthood also does a lot more than provide abortions, and a lot of those services may be at risk as well. What's your assessment of how Planned Parenthood stands now? It's in these states where the services are banned.
Right. Well, thanks for the question. And I can't speak for Planned Parenthood. I love the organization and was proud to be with it for many, many years. So I don't want to, but I will say this is an organization that has stood the test of time. Planned Parenthood is more than 100 years old and has, as I always said, like, we have the most committed alumni association of any organization in America, because 1 in 5 women in this country have been to Planned Parenthood at some point in their lifetime. And so it is, I feel like the loyalty of people that people have, and clearly now more than ever, this organization is going to be needed. My friends down in Texas, who I just was with, the Planned Parenthoods there are providing well women services, pap smears, breast exams, HIV services. They are committed to staying around, and obviously in the states where Planned Parenthood exists, where abortion is legal, the burden, not just on Planned Parenthood, but other abortion providers in states like Illinois, New York, California, et cetera, they need your support too, because they are dealing with now a landscape in which probably within a year after Dobbs, half of this country will have lost access to safe and legal abortion. Obviously, a lot of those folks can get services online through medication abortion, but a lot of people are going to travel to other states.
Mike asks the Solomonic question: is there a compromise position that might be workable in any legislation?
I mean, I don't know. I don't think that's actually what the American people want. And I don't think it's definitely not what the Republican Party wants. So it's sort of like anything that we would do, to me, is like negotiating against ourselves. And what I think is really, like, it's interesting, when Lindsey Graham says he wants a 15-week ban and people say, well, why? And then he makes up some kind of, like, he just like came up with that number because of like something, just, I don't know, like.
Earlier, he'd used the number, I think a year ago, of 20 weeks.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just like, it's all like, it's just like it's not based on medicine. It's not based on science. It's not based on what doctors and people who are caregivers provide. And so I don't think that this is an issue upon which we should compromise, because it sort of almost makes it political in the way that the American people don't believe it isn't. They believe that women and pregnant people and their doctors, or whoever they rely on, should be making these decisions. And they overwhelmingly trust women to make the decision that's right for them.
Marilyn wants to know why OBGYNs would even remain practicing in states where they could be prosecuted for murder.
Listen, it's really going to be tough. And I think this kind of goes to your earlier question about if there are places where Planned Parenthood doesn't exist anymore, what are the ramifications? I think the drain of OBGYNs, of other medical providers who are going to leave states so that they can actually practice medicine somewhere else is serious. And once you lose them for these reasons, there's a whole lot of care that goes away as well. I remember because of political problems, we had to close a Planned Parenthood in El Paso years ago. And but I guess about 3 years ago, we were able, the local affiliate was able to raise money and reopen. And women came into the clinic and said they hadn't been to a doctor since Planned Parenthood had closed before, because these are services that I know this from, again, the years I spent at Planned Parenthood. People are not rushing to get into the work of providing people with low incomes access to high quality reproductive care. It's just not. It's not a big business, booming business. And so the concern is not only what will happen to these doctors, but then what happens to people in small towns, in rural towns where they've already lost their local hospital, they've lost their local healthcare providers. And then we begin to see deserts, not only for abortions, but deserts for any kind of high quality OBGYN care. It's going to be devastating. We just don't even begin to know the story yet.
In order to completely control women's reproductive choices when it comes to abortion, states would have to do things that at this point would be unimaginable, as so many things are. We discussed them, touched on them earlier, like control movement from state to state. For example, people from Michigan can come to California on vacation and smoke dope legally. They don't get busted when they go back home for smoking dope. The apps on your phone, whether a state has the authority to seize those and search them, or even stopping the federal mails coming into a state in order to look for abortion related pills. So is that an area that you are looking at and that choice organizations are concerned about as the next step in this?
Oh, 100%. We are in completely uncharted waters, and on both sides. So like one of the things that I think is really important to understand is medication abortion, which is the abortion pill, for those of you who, don't follow, that actually has now become the most common form of abortion in this country. And since the Dobbs decision, this is one thing I do follow, is the traffic online, and it's like the number one searched piece of information in this arena, which is abortion pills online. How can I get them, and what do they cost? But we also, so that in some ways, it's not pre-Roe, because medication abortion didn't exist before Roe. It is a safe, early, effective method of abortion, not for everybody, but for millions of people, it is. So on the one hand, that's good. On the other hand, obviously, we're seeing already the use of police, prosecutors, search history. And we have not, and this is something I'm actually working on now, because I think it is really, really important, is how we can create a completely anonymous way for anyone to search information about whatever they need, and particularly for abortion services, but so that there is no search history left at the end of that, whether it's a chat, whether it is a search, because we are in a world where we have prosecutors, and Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, is a perfect example. The rules don't apply anymore, right? They will go after anyone. And so we are in a very scary new environment. And even this question of cross-border travel or sending pills into states, these are things that are not, that people have not sorted out yet. But yes, I would say there are a lot of, any crisis, creates opportunity. And I would say there are a lot of creative people who are committed to providing abortion access in this country that are thinking of all kinds of new ways to make sure that we can get care to patients.
Let me spin off a question that Leah is asking about the Supreme Court and Chief Justice Roberts, who has been trying and straddling an ever widening middle between the factions of the court. What damage does a ruling like this, do you think, do to just the sense of the judiciary and its role in our government?
Well, John Roberts is not in charge of this. He may be Chief Justice in name, but he's not in charge of this court. And that has just become glaringly obvious. I haven't looked at the most recent poll, but last time the last one that came out, people's opinion of the Supreme Court in this country is at the bottom. And that, I don't think that's going to change. Because this court, they're on a mission, and not just on abortion, on a lot of other rights that we have. That I also would say, I'm going to just put a little asterisk, say that's a question I talked to Dahlia about, who really follows the court so closely. But I think the opinions of the people have about the Supreme Court, and a body over which they have zero control. And we always, it's always been hard for Democrats to get people to vote about the Supreme Court because it just is like so far away. I think, again, it really does kind of fit into the path, this overarching feeling of like government control and taking our freedoms away, because there's nothing quite like having a judiciary that doesn't respect the will of the people. And that's where the Supreme Court is.
California is looking to take a vote to enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution, which would be fine, I suppose, for Californians. But does it not just enhance the sense of almost this patchwork of states' rights that harkens back 150 years to the Civil War, that geography is destiny when it comes to where you're born in the United States and the rights you have?
I mean, geography has been destiny even before Dobbs, was overturned. I mean, the barriers for people to access abortion in Texas, even before this, were huge. I mean, the efforts to shut down, we had to build ambulatory surgical centers. I won't even go into, so many laws were passed. So I think that's always been an issue, is that, and particularly, as we know, these abortion bans are falling most dramatically on people with low incomes, Black and brown women, young people in rural areas. So we have to acknowledge that and recognize that this is not the same for everybody, and make extra special efforts to make sure that everybody can get access to care. I still believe it is critical. Thank God California is doing what they were doing. New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, we have to have safe havens for people to get access to abortion. And we have to demonstrate that this is something that the voters can do and will do. Not every state can pass a ballot initiative, as we know. I mean, the laws are different in all 50 states, but I think it's extremely powerful. Look how powerful it was, even just for Kansas. I mean, the fact that we have retained access to legal abortion in Kansas is everything. So bravo to Californians and to the other folks who are enshrining these rights in their states.
We like to end on an optimistic note if we can. So maybe you can give us a minute or two on that.
I think this issue has ignited voters, and in a very tactical, short-term way, I'd say it's going to absolutely impact the midterm elections. And that's going to be the first shot across the bow. I think it has the potential of defining the next presidential election. That's not going to happen without a lot of work, but I absolutely believe this has been a wake-up call for voters who were not paying attention about just how extreme the Republican Party has gotten. So I guess I hope that's kind of a positive thing. The other thing I will say is I just have been I spent a lot of time in Texas and these states where abortion has now become illegal. I am blown away by the courage, the tenacity, the resilience of people in these states. They are not going back. And young people in particular, running abortion funds, protesting, forming organizations, registering voters. That's what gives me hope. This is not the end. This is just the beginning of a victorious fight that we are going to all lead together to restore abortion rights in this country and, frankly, defend our democracy.
Cecile Richards, thank you so much. I hope at some point we can have you back to use a little bit of a yardstick to assess where those changes have worked, and hear from you about your assessment of that and where the country's been moving. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pat. Great to be with you all.
You heard her mention Dahlia Lithwick. Dahlia Lithwick is going to be here on October 12th with Rick Hassan of UCLA, talking about exactly those issues and more about what's going on in the constitutional rights community, as so many constitutional issues seem to be coming before this court, with a new court and people who've been waiting a long time to take their questions to this court. To remind you, next week it's going to be Lawrence Tribe, the Harvard constitutional law professor, with Henry Weinstein of the University of California Irvine School of Law, talking about precarious times, our Constitution at risk. We do want to thank you all for joining these programs, for supporting these programs, and we'll see you back next week.